So normally, we cover bridezilla stories. Well, this one's a little different. OP's mother-in-law is the true bridezilla of the story, and she's not even getting married. Hi everyone. Before you get settled, make sure you get some popcorn or a drink from the kitchen first. Trust me, this is going to be a long story. It all started last May, about 14 months ago when my boyfriend proposed to me on our last night in Cuba. We had spontaneously decided on a vacation to Cuba that week, as it was a location that have forever been near the top of my bucket list. Although thinking back on it now, I suspect there was a bit more planning and trickery made on his part for this very special occasion. It was super romantic and instantly became the happiest days of my life. We partied the night away under the stars. The pressure immediately started to pile up as soon as we got home, with my euphoria skidding and suddenly halted faster than our jumbo jet had on its landing, when I came to the horrific realization of just how involved the mother-in-law is, or is expected to be in the whole process. She and I have never really managed to see eye to eye, even from the first time my fiancé brought me home to meet his parents after our third date. His father was kind to me, but his mother, I feel like just one look at me and decided she did not like me from instant onwards. The attitude I got from her reminded me of a tense job interview or a police interrogation. One step or word out of line and I would be exiled from my boyfriend's life. This first impression sadly left me feeling like I needed to be walking on eggshells when I was around her. And I spent many foolish attempts in the early days of the relationship trying to win approval from her. I knew I would never get. What started as the occasional persistent text message or spontaneous phone call to my fiancé, it transformed gradually into near constant nagging over every minor detail of our preparation. She had to know every who, what, where, and when, otherwise she felt like she was being excluded from the wedding. If only it were that easy to exclude her from this. Before the proposal, she never intruded into my personal life, whether because she didn't care or was polite enough not to poke. Whatever the case was, impending nuptials seemed to have it lit a spark under her, fueling her nosiness and penchant for butting in. I'm not sure what possessed her to think it was a good idea, but she even gate-crashed my bachelorette party, as if her present was not smothering enough as is. I was very careful in sending the invitations to only a small group of friends. She somehow found out anyways. Around this time, my fiancé was also pushing me into agreeing to rush the preparations and pick a sooner date so we could have the ceremony in the summer months. This change was completely unlike him, who's usually so methodical and a complete perfectionist at heart. I found out later this insistence had instead been forced onto him by the evil mother-in-law herself. I agreed to a sooner date because he desperately wanted to appease to his mother, and I suspect was just as eager as I was to finally be done with all that stress that she was crushing us with. I was glad on all accounts that it was soon to be over, with our wedding completely out of the way. We planned to be away quite soon after that, away on a honeymoon somewhere far, far away and hot and tropical. Whether it's the sea or a beach, our phones would always be off. A break that we both desperately needed. The days flew by while we both rushed to get everything set up and ready, reaching out to all our closest friends to help make it happen. And then suddenly it was upon us. The long-awaited day was welcomed by an immense and ominous downpour of rain, which peppered the city streets while the sun rose above the horizon from behind the veil of dark clouds. If this was supposed to be a sign for an omen or later, it was not a good one. As is customary to our culture, my fiancé and I parted ways the night before. Tradition and superstitions warding us away from seeing each other again until the very last moment. While I'd expected the mother-in-law to be part of his group, I found her instead waiting for my arrival at the venue early the next morning. She berated my tardiness even though I was still 3 hours early. I even arrived before the sun went up, and yet somehow I was still expected to be earlier. she never specified what time she arrived or how long she waited. She sat in my dressing room for most of the morning, voicing her unwanted opinions of my dress, acting both as my hardest critic and eccentric fashion consultant. Her bitter words were the result of buying a bridal dress without her approval, as I've opted to take her own mother and my best friend instead. A decision the mother-in-law had no intention to forget or forgive. These few times she did leave the room, it was only to oversee other aspects of the preparation in the venue. Though whatever powers of confidence or arrogance her double-shot latte granted her, she felt this false authority extended even over the venue staff as well. She ruled with an iron fist, struck fear into even the timid floor manager, who stood idly at their newfound dilemma. I mouthed a silent apology, which from no change in expression or demeanor looked like it fell short of being any genuine comfort. Stepping in to try and recover the reins, I asked her nicely not to order around the venue staff, but the request was met with a mixed temper of confusion and anger as she turned her focus back towards me. Clearly, she was not someone that could be reasoned with. After her verbal assaults had finished, she walked off, directing the venue staff at her leisure. Through intimidation and a compelling voice, she even dragged a few of my friends into servitude as well, while the rest of us hurried out of sight before we were put to work. After all, there was still much that I needed to do as well, so I returned to the dressing room. Entered the room, we locked the door, and over the next hour finished my preparations in a blur of teamwork, fixing my hair, my makeup, and my dress together. The silence ended with the door handle violently shaking by someone on the other side, prompting a quiet yelp from a few of us, as if our old memories born from horror movies were being relived. After an unsuccessful moment, the person stopped on the handle and began to bang on the door, repeatedly. After I had to ask them, they identified themselves as who else do you think? Mother-in-law, and demanded to be let in. It really was a horror movie. We finally found the courage to let her in when she furiously tore into each of us with her cutting words, making her thought clear on her supposed intent, exclusion from the room. With noon nearly at hand, we vacated the dressing room and took our positions across the venue, ready to await and welcome the crowd of guests. My side of the family consisted of my father, my uncle, and two brothers. We lost her mother in a battle of cancer a few years ago, leaving me with no positive female figures in my life. The mother-in-law surely gave me no pity when she heard the news herself. My fiancé's family, on the other hand, was much bigger, and full attendance they could have probably filled the venue alone, but we did not have to negotiate on cutting down that number just to allow my own guest. The mother-in-law leaned against a wall by the main entrance, reading carefully through her clipboard list of names, making soft remarks to herself as she examined all the names. While we were already prepared a list for her, she was adamant that she could make a better one of her own, so we were forced to leave her to handle it herself. I stood peering nervously around the corner of a hallway near my quarters as I saw the first cars pull into the parking lot. The mother-in-law had originally suggested that we should allocate parking, as well with certain bays to certain guests in order to be better organized on the day, but we found it unnecessary and did not want to overcomplicate the matters. We dismissed the idea and received plain-faced disappointment from her in return. It would seem her plan to stretch her imagined power and authority over the ceremony and its guests, to include when or whether the guests were allowed to stay or leave, was not actually something we were prepared to let her handle. Thank goodness. Well, I watched from upstairs window as the first cars began to approach, kicking up a long trail of dust along the driveway. For the next hour or so, the cars parked became overran with impatient parkers and opportunists, bustling with activity as cars scanned the lanes to get the closest bay, while other cars were just parked. The guests hustling from their vehicles, clad in bold suits and beautiful dresses, as they formed something resemble of a queue towards the venue's decorated entranceway. When I noticed that the queue had grown rather large and sluggish, now resorting to snake around the car park, or be forced to stand closer to the highway, I asked the bridesmaids to go downstairs and covertly investigate the issue. Well, she returned a few minutes later saying that the mother-in-law was stopping guests at the entry for some form of interrogation. The first interruption of the day saw panic start to swell in me along with a fiery rage. Today, of all days, I was not going to put up with my mother-in-law being like this. So mad, I marched downstairs to put an end to this nightmare before it got out of hand. Turning the corner, I saw her blocking the entrance. I couldn't believe it. With her clipboard in hand and pen in the other, she gestured towards the first guest pointedly, like she just turned up a fine dining restaurant in the city without booking a reservation. If her retirement plan wasn't working out, she would get a good reference here for a job as a restaurant or club bouncer, I thought amusingly. Well, despite her short stature, she emitted a very intimidating presence. Spotting my approach, the mother-in-law turns to say that my uncle had forgotten their wedding gift, and she was insisting they leave to retrieve it. Again, stern complaints. My uncle lived over 2 hours away from the venue, so if he left now, was not likely to return in time for the ceremony. Understanding his plight, I waved the concern and said he could post it after at a later date. The rest of the queue ferried through quickly, hearing the commotion as everyone else had produced the wedding gifts early and was ready to hand them over in exchange for their entrance, not wishing to be turned away or to get into another argument early in the day. After all, the guests had successfully made it inside. We ushered them into one of the dining rooms for appetizers before the ceremony. Each table had been purposefully and carefully positioned, with each chair assigned to a particular guest. In most weddings, this could be arguably the most political or nerve-wracking part of planning. Setting a favored guest too close may upset family members, while anyone being set far away from the main table might think they're being shunned or underappreciated. Friends are made and lost at these moments, you know. I asked one of my bridesmaids to lay the nameplates this morning with a detailed layout of the room to say who went where, which is why I was initially very worried when I walked through the room. I noticed some of the names on the wrong table. Quickly searching for and confronting her, I discovered she had put them out as I asked, but mother-in-law had interrupted the process and shooed her away. Unable to contain the situation, I could hear arguments start erupting throughout the hall, as one person stood by the main table watching on and admiring her handiwork. As I marched up to her, her smile was wiped from her face as she realized my mood was going on the defensive. Through a little tough questioning, she revealed that my friend had been setting the names all wrong, so she stepped in to fix everything, producing from a pocket her own map of the layout. Comparing it to my map, it was radically different. Her map showed that she had pushed my family and friends to the back of the room, with her family and friends were reserved for some of the prime positions at the table, which the mother-in-law had also decided she would just sit on. Without giving her another chance, I scrunched her map into a ball and turned to a curious crowd of bridesmaids hovering nearby, asking them to fan out and fix the layouts, ignoring the protest behind me. As they eagerly tended to their mission, I turned back towards the table, keeping eye contact with mother-in-law, as I picked up her nameplate and moved it to a smaller guest table. Her face changed from disgust to outrage in seconds, and she stormed out of the room before she burst into a temper tantrum. Spotting my fiancé surrounded by guests in the hallway, and with little remaining patience for my mother-in-law's games, I decided to solve the issue once and for all, with his assistance and/or approval. The mother-in-law must have had the same idea when I saw her storm out earlier. She must have instead used the hallways to go around me and reach her son without me catching on. Now, I saw her crouched in the crowd whispering in his ear. Their gazes flickered to me briefly during their conversation, and my fiancé's face twisted nervously, like receiving the events of the morning, altered, of course, to her benefit. My line of sight was temporarily blocked as I maneuvered myself through the crowd, and when I regained it again, she had snuck off with my fiancé, instead walking ahead to intercept my path. Grabbing my arm firmly, he led me off to a quieter part of the venue before asking me why I had been harassing mother-in-law. Against my objections, I saw him doubt which story to believe. Caught in a difficult choice like a mouse cornered by two cats, I stressed my version of the story with proof that some guests could testify to, and that he immediately finally caved in. But the mental exhaustion had taken its toll on him. In the end, he was unable to fully commit to believing her or my story, so we had to agree on a weak compromise and try to suit both parties involved. Mother-in-law would take her place back at the main table. In exchange, she would stop trying to control or harass the guest or staff. Despite my agreement to this plan, I had no faith that she would be kind to it. Truthfully, I knew, deep down, mother-in-law well enough to know that she would not be bargained with, especially if it was the person she competed with. It then fell up to me. If I could not get his approval on a plan, then I would have to do something myself. I stopped at the bar to collect my thoughts, along with a refill of champagne, because why not? I'd always heard that weddings could not be handled sober, and now I knew why. It helped that it tasted great too. The dusty system of mechanical gears that made up my brain jolted with an incredible realization after drinking through my beverage, birthing a fantastic idea on how I could safely and secretly get mother-in-law out of the way along with a little bit of revenge. The mother-in-law has since swapped her out morning latte for ordinary orange juice, resisting the temptation of the open bar and free-flowing champagne. While she insists to anyone that asks, she simply does not like the taste of alcohol. I knew from first-hand experiences during Thanksgiving, Christmas, and birthdays with her that her reason was far more strategic. On the odd occasion that she did not like to drink, it ended with her quickly losing her motor functions, bodily control, and coherent speech. Her tolerance to alcohol was actually shockingly low. She was a lightweight. Today, I suspected that she stayed on the soft drinks to keep a level head so that she could maintain her control of the wedding and its crowd. With her predacious eyes, she was a wolf alone with a herd of sheep. I moved purposefully around the bar, striding past the bewildered bartender and pushing through the swinging door in the kitchen, grabbing a glass from behind the shelf without breaking momentum. Well, peering back through the misted porthole, I went ahead and scanned the shelves for the variety of spirits and offered, as I assessed the perfect mixture of concoction. If she could taste the alcohol in her drink, she would immediately be suspicious and probably discard it for another glass. Whether she knew I've poisoned it or not, if she spotted me toiling away at the bar, she may also be wary of me, or come over to investigate it further, which would ruin the plan as well. I jumped back a little as the door swung open with enough force to imprint my face on it less than a pristine window. I began to call out in annoyance when I saw it was the bartender that noticed my strange behavior. Perfect, I thought. I pulled him to one side while considering whether I trusted him to give him the full story. Eventually, considering that if the mother-in-law had any doubts, she would likely break the boy to get the truth out of him, so it would be safer for both of us if we were kept in the dark. I asked him to make me an orange juice with a twist. Deceptively vague, but a knowing smile let me know he caught my meaning clear enough. I watched over his shoulder through the window as he hands moved with finesse and purpose in a blur of movements as he put together the perfect drink. Coming back to the kitchen not 2 minutes later, he handed me what appeared to be a perfectly standard glass of orange juice, while he described his process and invited me to try it. I was very pleasantly surprised that while he listed many ingredients, I could barely taste them. I thanked him before I hurried out again and mingled with the crowd while searching around for my prey, finding her on the side of the hall, having cornered a young couple who did not appear to be enjoying themselves. I snuck over, gesturing to the couple not to give my presence away as they struggled to decide where to avert their eyes, and then hovered close by until she set down her glass on the table next to her. Noticing the glass half empty, I quickly took a big swig of mine in order to match its contents before deftly swapping it. Almost knocking it over in the process, and disappearing back behind the wall of guests just a moment later, not daring to look back in case she caught sight of me. I suppressed my cheers until I snuck out of the hallway through a side door, and passing guests as I stepped outside for some fresh air. Reaching the cool exterior, I popped off my high heels and jumped up and down on the grass, as onlookers looked on in familiar amusement at my oddness. Out of breath and aching from a long day, I fell onto the garden clear and nearly fell asleep. Despite the sun now slowly starting to fall, it was still warm outside, refreshing in contrast to the stuffy and heated atmosphere of the hall I just escaped from. I was roused from my nap by a laughter and drawn into conversation by various guests with the same need to cool down or stretch their legs. I found myself relaxing outside for an hour longer than I anticipated, only excusing myself when I randomly remembered to check on whether Operation Orange Juice was a success or disastrous for me. I scanned the thinning crowd of the edge of the hall as more people left to wander the venue or return to their vehicles. In the end, I caught no sign of her, caught in conversation. I started to cross off likely places she would be, noticing my fiancé talking with his best man, my parents keeping to themselves at their table, and her other relatives mixing with guests I was not familiar with. I began to leave and scour through the rest of the venue when I hear a shrill voice cut through the room, causing it to fall silent. My head whipped around to the source of the sound and found a woman slouched over the bar, her head nodding to herself as she motioned for another glass. I also noticed my fiancé slowly making his way to the bar, caught by the many curious guests who stopped their own conversations to follow the new drama as it unfolded. Their breath caught in their throat like they were gripped by suspense and excitement. He softly rested his hand on her shoulder as he whispered into her ear to spare her the embarrassment, though in her state, she freely repeated his words and she replied openly and loudly, pretending to only just notice the commotion. I approached as well, my heels clacking distinctly across the wooden floor in a manner to show that I wanted to be noticed. My fiancé turned towards me with concern, but I helped to reassure him that she would be okay. I suggested that she may just need to lie down and can join us later for the proper ceremony, when she's feeling better. An idea he immediately jumped on. With his steady arm and my guidance, we ambled over to my dressing room upstairs, far enough away from the event that she could get some rest without disturbance for a little while. Far enough away that maybe no one would hear if she woke up early, though. Setting her down, I cracked the window open to give her a cool breeze before pulling my fiancé away from sitting by her side all evening, with the same reassurance that she's going to be fine. Tonight was our night, honey, not hers. As we turned to return to the party, I said I needed to redo my lipstick, so he went on without me. After he was safely at a distance, I locked the dressing room and hid the key in my handbag. I called everyone back into the hall for toast and celebrations as we finally started to enjoy the day. With mother-in-law finally out of the way, the rest of the day proceeded smoothly. While her absence may have been noticed, the other guests kept quiet about it, probably with relief and curiosity in equal measure. I told my fiancé not to worry about her, and she would be sure to reappear when she could, omitting the fact that I had put her in timeout because I knew he would be unable to stop myself from going to find her. An hour later, we all moved to the ceremony room, guests taking their assigned seats on either the bride or groom side of the hall, separated by a red carpet walkway from the door altar. Our song started playing over the loudspeaker, alerting everyone to stop their conversations and to stand attention as the ceremony began. I slowly paced down the aisle along with my father and a trail of bridesmaids behind me, walking to meet my fiancé and the marriage official. We exchanged vows to a chorus of sniffles and camera shots taken from the endearing audience, with not an unfriendly face amongst them. As the light of the sun began to dim, We gathered around our tables for an array of extravagant set meals delivered on silver platters. Each course ended with extra drinks and smiling guests. The atmosphere of the room was warm, uplifting. The heavy curtain of oppression lifted to give away a night of entertainment and celebration. My fiancé still checked his watch occasionally, followed by nervous glances at his eyes, darted quizzically around the corner for the missing member. But each time I reassured him into forgetting about her just to enjoy the night. After dinner, the tables were pushed aside and we created a massive dance floor. Our main table repurposed into a DJ booth as guests swayed wildly to the tune of the beat. With the loud thumbing of the bass, I saw the evening first take its turn as the mother-in-law nightmare entered the room. The beat echoing the stomping of her feet as she approached us. As the hours ticked by into the early evening, guests began to say their goodbyes before retiring from the event. The busy crowd was dwindling smaller, with only the most inebriated or otherwise wild guest dancing along. Some guests stayed near the venue and arranged hotels rooms, while less fortunate persons now facing the longer journey home on lonely country roads. My fiancé had also left the festivities some time ago to settle mother-in-law into her room. But despite being tired and still a bit tipsy, she was apprehensive to leave in case she was given another time out, only later giving in with reassurance and difficult convincing from her beloved baby boy. That did not stop her from giving me evil glares, all while she left the room, of course, but I waved, mustering a warm smile I could fake convincingly, although hampered by my own fatigue and tipsiness. Well, after that, I danced the night away until my fiancé returned. We danced, and danced, and danced a little more before even the DJ had to call it quits. And despite our beating hearts, we closed the curtain on our wedding day. The next morning was abuzz with activity as venue staff and friends rushed to clean the yesterday's mess, in time before the next venue's big event. So, I nursed an aching hangover, but saw no sign of mother-in-law, whom I assumed would probably still be asleep. Seeing my husband sluggishly carry bin bags over to the venue entrance with a tired and pained expression confirmed for me that I was not at least the only one still aching with a hangover. With my assistance, we were soon ready to depart. I started the car while my husband went to rouse the dragon. 40 minutes goes by before I catch sight of them again, hobbling slowly from the entrance. The mother-in-law, still wearing her clothes from last night along with a pair of very dark glasses. Though sustained effort, she fell into her seat roaring and clutching at her head while my husband jumped in beside me and then we were off. Well, flash forward to the following evening, and we were already getting ready to fly away for the honeymoon. My husband jammed the rest of our belongings into a tiny suitcase, while I stared in disbelief at the plane tickets. I clutched tightly in my hands. While we had not planned on eloping, especially given how close he is to his mother, this felt quite close to it. In a spark of daring deception, he even told mother-in-law our honeymoon was not planned to start until next week, which helped pry her off our backs long enough to put together a trip tonight. We managed to get as far as the terminal before our phones buzzed from the likely suspect. Well, you know what? We turned the phones off and boarded the plane for a week of sun, sea, relaxation, and no worries. Okay, guys, well, if you like drama, this story was jam-packed. I don't know if she handled the mother-in-law situation properly. I mean, drugging someone and locking them in a room, that can never end well, but I will say this time, it looks like it might have worked. Guys, how else would you have handled this? You know what I think? I think OP's soon-to-be husband should have stood up more to his mom and said, hey, you're being way too aggressive here. I know you want to be a part of this, but you're ruining our special day. Can you please just simmer down a little bit? And I think if OP's soon-to-be husband would have said that, things might have been completely different. But guys, let me know your thoughts, your opinions. What would you have done differently? Would you go with the old lock in a room and throw away the key technique that OP did? Drop it down below. Also, one little announcement before we end this. I just started a new Instagram channel. You can find the link right below in the description section. Also, the pinned comment. What we're doing on there is some very interesting stuff. 60-second animated stories every single day, green screen pictures, behind the scenes, and very important updates and announcements of when other stories are going to be coming out. So you're not going to want to miss that crucial information if you do like these stories. So go follow the Instagram. That supports me a lot, and I really appreciate that, guys. Have a wonderful day, and Mr. Reddito, we'll see you in the next one. Peace.